Hello and welcome back to our reading of Thomas Carlyle's French Revolution. We're on Volume 1, Book 4, The States General, Chapter 1, The Notables Again. And we've seen the notables previously under the Parliament of Paris, when the finance controller Carlyle thought an assembly of notables would be the answer to the problem of the French, not necessarily of the legislator, but of the restlessness of the upper classes in France, who wanted to both rectify the finances and also, because of the paper age, create what they thought to be a more enlightened process of government than simply the corrupt cronyism of what they saw swallowing around the king at Versailles. But as we saw in the previous part, the Parlement of Paris was the largest of these parlements, which were throughout France, and the attempts to reform all these were failings. Loménie de Brienne was the de facto finance controller that we last saw, though he went under the title of Prime Minister, and he failed to enact much of the reforms that he wanted to, and he failed to satisfy the notables. So the Assembly of Notables didn't work under Cologne. They were then cast out, and the Parlement of Paris was even closed under Loménie de Brienne. Now both of those are gone as characters, but the notables are still around, murmuring, restless. And all their talk now, as a rectification, is of the States General. So Carlyle starts that since the year 1614, there have no States General met in France. So that's true. It had basically been phased out in the 17th century as a result of the growing absolutism under first Louis XIII and then solidified under Louis XIV, L'État c'est moi, and all of that. So there hasn't been one since 1614. This is now 1788-89, that winter. We're turning the new year into the infamous year 1789. So really, what form would it take? They all like this term, States General. It has connotations in French history, but one has not been around since 1614. Each body corporate, each privileged, each organised class has secret hopes of its own in that matter. So again, the problem with the French government here is that it has too many disgruntled classes at once, and each of them can see in this States General the solution to their own quandaries, which really does make the inevitability of it just that, inevitable, when you have so many disgruntled classes around you. And that's the position Louis XVI finds himself in. However superfluous was that invitation of Loménie's, the invitation to thinkers. And this is a callback to the Book 3, Parlement of Paris. Thinkers and unthinkers by the million are spontaneously at their post, doing what is in them. Clubs labour, Société Publique, Breton Club, Enraged Club, Club des Enragés. Likewise, dinner parties at the Palais Royal, your Mirabeaus, Talleyrand's dining there in company with Chamfort, Morelets, and Duponts, and hot pamphleteers not without object. Now, he kind of whittles off a few of the names there of these disgruntled classes, or the main actors who have emerged in the late 1780s as proponents of the States General. Honoré Gabriel Riquetti Comte de Mirabeau, he's come up a lot. Carlyle is certainly fond of him. As a great orator, he managed to captivate a lot in the prelude to the Revolution. We have Charles Maurice de Talleyrand Périgord, the Talleyrand's. Of course, he becomes quite an influential player later on, notably as Foreign Secretary under Napoleon. Very untrustworthy character, synonymous with someone who is quite duplicitous. Nicolas Chamfort, we can see here, another one of these thinkers, 1784. Through influence of Calonne, previously mentioned, he became the secretary to the king's sister, Madame Elisabeth. And in 1786, he received a pension of 2,000 livres from the royal treasury. He was thus once more attached to the court and made friends there despite his satirical attitude. He quit the court for good, and an unfortunate mysterious love affair was taken back. Okay, can see there he met Honoré Mirabeau and helped finance a lot of them and a lot of his endeavours, and was said to have even written one of his speeches. So that's Nicolas Chamfort. We've already met Pierre Samuel Dupont de Nemours. He was brought in under as a speaker, I think, for the Notables, or as a secretary rather for the Notables, in place of Mirabeau back in 1787. So they're all people who would vie for power in these new assemblies and these new bodies which were trying to form in France. And Carlyle also mentions André Morellet, who was a French economist, contributed to the encyclopedia. So again, someone of that paper age. Again, born 1727, so he's been around the block at this point. But there's a problem with the States General, and that is, what is the Third Estate? Well, the Third Estate, answers everyone, is all. What has it hitherto been in our form of government? Nothing. What does it want? To become something. So they're simply wanting the Third Estate to fulfill this idea of all as an assembly. Something that can represent all of France. And we'll see where that leads later. It's an interesting turn. It sounds quite, in our modern term, quite left-wing, but there's a strange nationalism to that, because the body is actually meant to be filled up of the people of France, and that in turn has quite a nationalistic rhetoric to it also. So it's an interesting one. And to become something, Qu'est-ce que le tiers-état was published January 1789. D'Orléans, for be sure he, on his way to chaos, is in the thick of this, and promulgates his deliberations. This is Louis-Philippe II, Duc d'Orléans. You can see here he had a liberal ideology, and was a member of the Jacobin faction, so really was a revolutionary from within. He was a cousin to the king, but had no time for him. And we can see here also a leadership role in the Estates General. Elected States General by 3 districts: nobility of Paris, Villers-Cotterêts, and the Crépy-en-Valois. So when we talk of the d'Orléans, we are talking of someone from the upper classes who has a liberal ideology and who has an animosity or disgruntlement against the existing king and his immediate household. How an ideal, all-seeing Versailles government sitting there on such principles in such an environment would have determined to demean itself at this new juncture may even yet be a question. The new omnipotent unknown of democracy was coming into being, in presence of which no Versailles government either could or should, except in a provisory character, continue extant. Abdication and domine dignitas have been the issue. The domine dignitas is a Lord, let us go, from Luke. Again, another biblical reference. So, amongst the chattering classes, amongst the classes really led by the likes of an Orléans here, or a Mirabeau here, are talking about the genuine construct of an Estates General from the outside. And they come to the 3 estates. And the 3 estates can, by management, be set against each other. The third will, as heretofore, join with the king, will out of mere spite and self-interest be eager to tax and vex the other 2. So this should be a role that can be played by a good monarchy, can play these different estates, the nobility, the clergy, and then this third estate against each other. But we don't have a great king, Louis XVI, and he's not able to properly do that, not able to properly gain the support of the third estate against the other 2, which should be really what he's doing, or trying to invoke, Louis XVI. But he's he's a very absent character from all of this. Carlyle's been going at this for over 100 pages now, and Louis XVI has done nothing. It's all been stuff happening around the idea of him as a king, but him as an actor, we have not seen him at all. Now, the grand questions for the present have got reduced to 2. The double representation and the vote by head. Shall the Commons have what is known as a double representation? The double representation is, can you really be represented in some of the different estates? So could you be represented as part of the clergy and also part of the third estate? We saw Talleyrand earlier. He, at the moment of the French Revolution, is actually a bishop. We can see here, 4th of January 1789, he was consecrated a bishop by Louis-André de Grimaldi. So we have a lot of these characters who are interested in double representation. On the 6th of November of this year, 1788, these notables accordingly have reassembled, so hence we get the notables again. It is the hardest winter since 1709, thermometer below 0 Fahrenheit, Seine river frozen over. And this is again the interesting point. We noted in the last book, Volume 1, Book 3, Parlement de Paris, when the Captain d'Auguste, captain of the Garde Française, locked the Parlement of Paris for good and kicked them out, that Paris did not revolt. And one of the key ingredients to the revolution, of course, is hunger. And that will come in later, but he's foreshadowing that now. It's a hard winter. Staggered at the double representation, at the vote by head, there is not affirmative decision, there is mere debating. Again, talk, not action. And so they vanish after a month's session on this 12th of December, year 1788. These whole 6 noisy months, for it began with Brienne in July, has not rapport followed rapport, and one proclamation flown in the teeth of the other. So even Carlyle at this point does get to the idea that these notables are circling around and around. They've tried the Assembly of Notables, they've tried the Parlement of Paris again, they've been exiled to Troyes, the Parliament's been closed, they've reassembled again in the winter of 1788, and all of it's gotten nowhere. So at least by royal edict, the 24th of January, does it finally, be impatient expectant France, become not only indubitable that national deputies are to meet, but possible, so far and hardly further has the royal regulation gone, to begin electing them. So we get a royal edict on the 24th of January which tries to resolve some of this and said yes, they will meet. And they will be elected. That resolves the vote by head. And we're on to chapter 2. The election. Up then and be doing! The royal signal word flies through France as though vast forests the rushing of a mighty wind. To elect your electors, such is the form prescribed, then to draw up your writ of plaints and grievances, cahier de plaintes et doléances, of which latter there is no lack, so never ask the disgruntled classes for their grievances, they will inundate you. The inarticulate buzzing becomes articulate speaking and acting. And here we have it. The problem with the edict, the Règlement pour la convocation des États généraux à Versailles, which came on the 24th of January 1789, is that it has allowed an articulation and a crystallization of what had been, in Carlyle's mind, mere chattery and buzzing. So what to us also has hope reached down even to us? Hunger and hardship are not to be eternal. This is again the news filtering down to the proper lower classes, who so far have taken very little notice of what is going on. But it's been a harsh winter and they are hungry. So they're thinking, well, hang on, we're going to get a say now. It's going to be an election. You've planted into their minds the idea of representation and the idea of sufficiency, both in terms of political representation, but also more just sustenance. Paris alone of towns is to have representatives. The number of them, 20. Interesting. A lot of the revolution is a Parisian revolution. Very concentrated on what it was the most developed and urban landscape in France at the time. Paris is divided into 60 districts. Each is choosing 2 electors. So reinstated Parlement at Besançon, remember we had regional parliament, so Besançon is out to the east of France, which stands astonished at this behemoth of a States General it had itself evoked, starts forward with more or less audacity to fix a thorn in its nose. The Breton noblesse must even let the mad world have its way. So this is the reaction of the other parlements. Seems like it's going to be very Parisian focused and there's some disgruntlement. How do you square the circle? You've got a States General, but then you also still have the provincial parliaments, so their own representation. In Provence, the privileged back their ice parliament, so they like the continuation of that parliament. Whereupon Mirabeau, protesting aloud, remember Mirabeau is from the ice parliament originally, This same noblesse amid huge tumult within the doors and without flatly determines to expel him from their assembly. So Mirabeau thinks, no, you should not convene ice with your provincial parlement. The answer is in the States General. So he gets expelled. In all countries at all times, exclaims he, departing, the aristocrats have implacably pursued every friend of the people. This is Mirabeau exiting for the Estates General, for Paris, where he senses the real energy is happening. That he now, to ingratiate himself with his third estate, opened a cloth shop in Marseille. Okay, well, not immediately to Paris, but you can see he's trying to ingratiate himself with the third estate. He's opening a cloth shop in Marseille. Just an interesting tactic by Mirabeau. But indeed, if Achilles in the heroic ages killed mutton, why should not Mirabeau and the unheroic ones measure broadcloth? So he set up a trade trying to ingratiate himself with what he thinks will be the people who will try and elect him in Marseille. And Carlyle there says, well, if Achilles in heroic killed mutton, in the unheroic, your Mirabeaus will measure breadcloth. And it's something that does come up in Carlyle's lectures on hero and hero worship, that the 18th century is a very unheroic age. And as mentioned earlier by his disdain for Voltaire, Mirabeau would be among these. More authentic as his triumph progresses. He is deputy elect both of ice and of Marseille, but will prefer ice. So he gets to choose. He's deputy elect. So Mirabeau is popular enough that he will be nominated for this Estates General. And he goes under the ice. Though he's still tension there with the old parlements who were sceptical of the new organ of state. But in the meantime, Mirabeau he's outgrown that provinciality. He has become a world compeller, says Carlyle, and a ruler of men. And that's crucial. Mirabeau has become the ruler of men. What has Carlyle said about Louis XVI yet? Nothing. Worthy Dr. Guillotine, respectable practitioner in Paris, has drawn up his little plan of carrière of doléance. This is the letters of grievance, and it's coming from a certain Dr. Guillotine, whose name really says everything it needs to say. Obviously, will become an actor later. That very guillotine being associated with the perversity of the French Revolution's idea of rationality, that you turn execution into something that a machine can perform. Trading, speculation, commerce of all kinds has, as far as possible, come to a dead pause, and the hand of the industrious lies idle in his bosom. Carlyle's always interested in the hands of the industrious, and when they're idle, it's never a good thing. So the talkers have had their way, and as a result, industry is kind of forestalled. Otherwise sounded the clang of Phoebus Apollo's silver bow, scattering pestilence and pale terror. For this clang, too, was of imagination, preternatural, and it too walked in formless immeasurability, having made itself like to the night. Nocti Eucus, as the Greek translation reads. The pale terror is a reference to the Iliad, and made itself to night is also from the Iliad, Book 1. He also mentions preternatural machinery. He's mentioned imagination, preternatural. He loves this idea of the preternatural. That there is something, this is the hidden madman lurking beneath, and this raw hunger, this bad winter, is evoking that preternatural element. So at the face of it, the notables have what they want. They have this Estates General happening. But underneath it, the third estate, who are kind of voting them in, or at least ostensibly doing so, are the ones who are really, it's gnawing at them, hunger. Something more base, more preternatural. On the whole, we may not predict that a people with such width of credulity and incredulity, the proper union of which makes suspicion, and indeed unreason generally, will see shapes enough of immortals fighting in its battle ranks, and never want for epical machinery. So, in the tumult, in the preternatural machinery, the masses begin to see in certain characters what Carlyle calls an epical machinery. So, coming from the epic. So they invoke into them the characteristics of an Achilles, or the characteristics of Homeric hero. Chapter 3. Grown Electric. Our Paris committees of the 60 districts are busier than ever. It is now too clear that Paris elections will be late. Again, this is the King's edict saying that there will be elections. It does not abate, but it only encourages activity and clamour and chaos. Besenval, now in active command, Commandant of Paris, does towards evening to Réveillon's earnest prayer send some 30 gardes françaises. So, Paris is active, and the guards and the commanders, this one being Besenval, are sending guards strategically around Paris, because the late election has really amped up this energy, this irritation. A ballet aristocrate down with the aristocrats, insult the cross of Saint Louis, we hear cries. Besenval takes his resolution, orders out the Garde Suisse with 2 pieces of artillery. Again, this could be the match now. Unfortunate Réveillon has found shelter in the Bastille, does therefrom, safe behind stone bulwarks, issue plaint, protestation, explanation for the next month. Bold Besenval has thanks from all the respectable Parisian classes. So, they've ordered in the Swiss Guards, which notably has a foreign name on it. We talked about that national element to the Third Estate and what it has unleashed to quell the agitation. And one of the guards, Réveillon, has now retreated into the Bastille for a month off the back of having attacked these or taken resolution orders to fire at those, saying down with the aristocrats. And of course the notables of Paris are quite happy with that. Brigands or whatever they might be, it was bitter earnest with them. They bury their dead with the title of Défenseurs de la Patrie, martyrs of the good cause. Again, the Défenseurs de la Patrie, of the fatherland, defenders of the fatherland. This idea of the Third Estate has become inextricable from the idea of France, the national movement. Insurrection has now served its apprenticeship, says Carlyle. Let that rock fortress, tyranny's stronghold, which they name Bastille, or building as if there were no other building, look to its guns. So Réveillon has retreated into the Bastille, and because he's retreated from the agitation into it, he's actually created the Bastille in the minds of the public to be this symbol of tyranny and this stronghold of all that is crooked with the regime. And we're on to the final chapter of this book, but it is I think it's a very interesting one. It's the procession, right? And we will have the opening of the Estates General, and through the procession, almost like Petrarch in a triumph, or the March of a Roman Triumph, certainly what Carlyle is going for, he will bring you through some of the characters who are going to be going in. So we've reached on the first Saturday of May, it is Gala at Versailles, and Monday the 4th of the month is to be a still greater day. Good Louis welcomes his honourable members. Spacious hall, with raised platform for throne, court, and blood royal. Space for 600 common deputies in front, for half as many clergy on this hand, and half as many noblesse on that. And there we have the 3 estates. It has lofty galleries, where from dames of honour, splendid in gaze d'or, foreign diplomacies, and other gilt-edged, white-frilled individuals to the number of 2,000 may sit and look. And here's an engraving by Isidor Stanislas Hellman of the event. Really captures what Carlyle's getting at. Versailles is a very sea of men, says Carlyle, and no one might weep like Xerxes. This is from Herodotus' history, where Xerxes weeps at having failed to conquer Greece. So perhaps Louis will weep like Xerxes of having seen the limitations of his power. It is the baptism day of democracy. Sick time has given birth to it, the numbered months being run, the extreme unction day of feudalism, a superannuated system of society, decrepit with toils, for it has not done much, produced you, and what ye have and know. And you see Carlyle here is not overawed with it. It's not this inevitable progress for him. Behold, however, the doors of Saint Louis Church flung wide, the procession of processions, advancing towards Notre Dame. Shouts rend the air, one shout at which Grecian birds might drop dead. The elected of France, and then the court of France, they are marshalled and march there, all in prescribed place and costume. The Grecian birds might drop dead is reference to Plutarch, in the life of Titus Flaminus. Volume and power of the human voice, said Plutarch, was then apparent to the eye, for ravens, which chanced to be flying overhead, fell down into the stadium. Yes, in that silent marching mass there lies futurity enough. And he's going to tell you who was in these masses of future importance. No symbolic ark, like the old Hebrews, do these men bear, yet with them, too, is a covenant. They, too, preside at a new era in the history of men. The whole future is there, destiny, dim, brooding over it. In the rustling of battle banners, the tramp of hosts, in the glow of burning cities, in the shriek of strangled nations, such things lie hidden, safe wrapped in this 4th day of May. Let me just pick out some of the characters then that Carlyle has gone through. So surely also in some place not of honour stands or sprawls up querulous, that he too, although short, may see Jean-Paul Marat of Neuchâtel, O Marat, renovator of human science, lecturer on optics, O thou remarkablest horseleech, once in D'Artois' stables. Now we've had Marat before, mainly the Marat, who's the subject of The Death of Marat by Jacques-Louis David. Again, a radical voice and a vigorous defender of the sans-culottes. But as a scientist, again, was seen to be a part of that enlightenment. There's a huge brawny figure then he talks about, through whose black brows and rude flattened face, figure écrasé, there looks a waste energy as of Hercules not yet furibund. He is an esurient, unprovided advocate, Danton by name, him mark. And then there's this other slimmer one, and this figure is Camille Desmoulins. So we've got Jacques Danton and Camille Desmoulins. Georges-Jacques Danton, leading figure in the early stages of the French Revolution, in particular as the first president of the Committee of Public Safety. And we can see here, Carlyle says, he is the president of the electoral Condelier district at Paris, or about to be it, and shall open his lungs of brass. And he certainly looks like a formidable figure. Carlyle calling him the huge brawny figure. You really see that here in this painting. It is by an unidentified painter, but look at the sheer figure of Danton. So imposing. And here is the slim one next to him that Carlyle talks about. This is Camille Desmoulins. Lucie Simplice Camille Benoit Desmoulins, journalist and politician who played an important role in the French Revolution. Desmoulins was tried and executed alongside Danton when the Committee of Public Safety reacted against Dantonist opposition. So, he's going to be in the struggle for power later. But right now, they're walking in this procession to the Estates General on the 4th of May. Some of the players have slipped into power now with the Estates General, and that's the important thing that Louis has let go with this edict. He's let men like Desmoulins and Danton grab onto the coattails of power for the first time. Get a taste of it. And then we have Gabriel Honoré Riqueté de Mirabeau, the world compeller, man ruling deputy of ICE. Of course, he's there. Mirabeau. Yes, reader, that is the type Frenchman of this epoch, as Voltaire was of last. The National Assembly were all different without that one. Nay, he might say, was the old despot, the National Assembly, I am that. So Carlyle says here that Mirabeau, for this Estates General, is really, I am the Estates General, similar to the way Louis XIV would say, l'état c'est moi. As for Gabriel Honoré, in these strange wayfarings, what has he not seen and tried? Remember, he tried to become secretary of the Assembly of Notables and so on. He is the forerunner of everything in terms of reform and changing the organs of the legislature. And he will continue to reform it so long as until he finds it reformed to his liking, i.e. that he is in a position of power in whatever is the reformed manner of it. For indeed hardly since the Arabian prophet lay dead to Ali's admiration was there seen such a love hero with the strength of 30 men. In the war again he has helped to conquer Corsica. In literature he was written on despotism, on lettres de cachet, erotic, sapphic, Watrerian, obscenities, profanities, books on Prussian monarchy, on Cagliostro and Calonne, and on the water companies of Paris. Pass on thou questionable Gabriel Honoré, the greatest of them all, and in the national deputies in the whole nation there is none like and none second to thee. So Mirabeau is clearly the leader of this gang, but Carlyle raises then an important question. But now if Mirabeau is the greatest, who of these 600 may be the meanest? So what he's really getting at is the new institutions exist, but they still must be filled with characters. So we have the leader, we have Mirabeau, who's going to be the meanest. Carlyle's always interested not so much in the theoretical stated role of the institution, but more in terms of who are the individuals that are going to fill this institution, because that is going to be what's really going to finalize what the role of the institution is. The characters that fill it are what defines it, not the theory that comes beforehand. That's the Carlyle position. As for the meanest, he says that greenish-coloured, that vertadre individual is an advocate of Arras. His name, Maximilien Robespierre, the son of an advocate. Son of an advocate, someone, i.e., who talks for a living, so we can see contempt from Carlyle already. Maximilien the Firstborn was thriftily educated. He had a brisk Camille Desmoulins for schoolmate in the college of Louis le Grand at Paris. The Rennes people have elected Farmer Gerard, a man of natural sense and rectitude, without any learning. And this is it, Michel Gerard. Now, what's interesting about Michel Gerard here, and he's comparing it to all of the Parisian representatives. Rennes was from the Parlement of Brittany. So some of these provincial ones are not key actors in the establishments of the States General. What have Paris done? They have elected Dantons, Camille Desmoulins, Robespierres. Some of the provincial ones have given us a Gerard, who is just a farmer. So who's really going to run the roost in the Estates General? It's going to be these Parisians of the advocacy class, like a Robespierre. They're going to come to the fore. They're the ones ready to take power. They're the ones who will know how to use this new organ of the Estates General to their own will more than the provincial players. Of course, an obvious exception to that is Mirabeau. So we have worthy Dr. Guillotine, we mentioned earlier. Guillotine can improve the ventilation of the hall. In all cases of medical police and hygiene, be a present aid. Carlyle here, just pure foreshadowing. We all know what the guillotine is. As if he were his daughter, he talks of his machine. La guillotine, with my machine, messieurs, I whisk off your head. Vous faites sauter la tête. In a twinkling, you have no pain. So he talks of it as if it is something coming out of the Enlightenment. Really, it is a hellish idea, because you've removed the pain and suffering from death. And so you're now looking at it even in an even colder disposition. It's quite dangerous. In the Commons deputies there are merchants, artists, men of letters, and 374 lawyers. Again, the advocates. 374 lawyers. And at least one clergyman, the Abbé Sieyès. Manuel Joseph Sieyès was French Roman Catholic abbé, clergyman, political writer who was a chief political theorist of the French Revolution. So he is quite important. Again, you can see his portrait here is done by Jacques-Louis David. So, unmistakable, great character to that. Next follow the noblesse and the clergy. They are Liancourt, they are Le Rochefoucauld, the liberal Anglomaniac dukes, the social reformer Rochefoucauld. There is a filially pious Lally, a couple of liberal Lameths. Above all, there is a Lafayette, whose name shall be Cromwell Grandison and fill the world. So Lafayette, of course, is Gilbert de Motier, Marquis de Lafayette, very famous in America. A lot of anything named after Lafayette is named after him. He was commanding American troops in the siege of Yorktown, and so one of the only players to have a key role in both the American Revolution and later the French Revolution. So he is in the notables, or the noblesse of these three estates. We'll come back to him later. And once these cavalry dukes, or dukes as they are still named, did actually lead the world. So what Carlyle's getting at here is The noblesse have come out. There's a few he's mentioned. Lafayette will still have a part to play, but a lot of these old dukes are coming out, and they're now secondary. They have ceded. They once led the world, and now they do not. Now it is going to be these lawyers, or the men who are of the lawyer class, who are going to begin to lead France. We have Bishop Talleyrand Perigord. His reverence of Autun, a sardonic grimness, we're on to the clergy now, of course, lies in that irreverent reverence of Autun, the irreverent reverence of Talleyrand. Very witty by Carlyle. Age of paper and a burning of paper. Consider Bishop Talleyrand and Marquis Lafayette as the topmost of their two kinds, the general and not so much the bishop, but the middleman. Talleyrand is the guy who gets things done. And say once more, looking at what they did and what they were, O tempus ferax rerum, which is from Ovid's Metamorphoses, book 15. On the whole, however, has not this unfortunate clergy also drifted in time stream, similar to the noblesse that came before, far from its native latitude, an anomalous mass of men of whom the whole world has already a dim understanding that it can understand nothing. So, when the elites lose their prestige here, Carlyle says they drift. They drift, he calls it drifting in latitude, but really it's stepping aside in power, isn't it? And all the layman needs to know in order for this to happen is that the elites know nothing. So if the clergy are an elite, but now everyone knows one thing about them, that is that they know nothing, they've immediately lost their own power. So there's always been, we talk of technocracy and a rule of experts. There has always been a rule of experts. It's simply the belief that the expert is such an expert. That's what drives them into the positions of power. So the clergy would at one time would have been considered experts on all things spiritual, which is all things moral, which is all things really internal, or how man should live his life. They were closer to the concept of God, so they were closer to a higher being than the layman. This is how the layman would have seen it. So in their own way, they were experts. And when that belief is eroded, so is eroded their power. King Louis with his court brings up the rear. He, cheerful on this day of hope, is saluted with plaudits. Still more, Necker, his minister. We mentioned Necker replaced Lomini de Brienne as the finance controller. Poor Marie Antoinette, with thy quick noble instincts, vehement lancings, vision all too fitful, narrow for the work thou hast to do. Oh, there are tears in store for thee, bitterest wailings, soft womanly meltings, though thou hast the heart of an imperial Teresia's daughter. Thou doomed one, shut thy eyes on the future. And so in the stately procession have passed the elected of France, some towards honour and quick-fire consummation, most towards dishonour, not few towards massacre, confusion, emigration, desperation, all towards eternity. You mentioned it was like a triumph of Petrarch, and of course one of Petrarch's most famous triumphs is his triumph of eternity, so perhaps an exact call out there from Carlyle. So thousandfold complex a society ready to burst up from its infinite depths, and these men, and that's really it, isn't it? There's infinite depths in the ideal of what the Estates General will be, but it needs to be crystallized in the form of characters, in the form of men, and these are some of them that we've gone through. Man was without duty round him, except that he to make a constitution, which is quite a free rein. He is without heaven above him, or hell beneath him. He has no God in the world. Belief, or what is still worse, canting half-belief, which very similar, he mentioned that in his lectures on hero and hero worship, that the unbelief or half-belief is even worse. Or worst of all, mere Machiavellian pretense of belief. So there's a third character. Belief, canting half-belief, and then a pretense of belief. Fill these characters who are walking into the States General to make a constitution. Whatever that means. Couvrez-vous, découvrez-vous. Hats off, hats on, says Carlyle. The session terminates without further accident or omen than this, with which, significantly enough, France has opened her States General.